Hi, I'm Father Doug. We're back with faithfulness and the culture, the spiritual fruit of the Holy Spirit that we're focusing on in this talk is faithfulness. But we have a culture, don't we, that we live in. And that culture is becoming more and more contrary to the teachings of the Catholic Church. Our kids see that. And here I'm thinking more of older children, those that are going into high school, those who are in high school, and really our grown-up kids in college. This is a contradiction that they have to deal with. You can't just write that off and say, well, if they're faithful to the church, it'll all take care of itself. That's true in the perfect child, in the one that buys everything you say, the one who's always faithful to the church, the one, if the church says it, I believe it. But if you line up 50 kids, how many of those 50 will do that? Children are taught to question. They just sort of naturally question. Why? They want to know. So two streams here that they're living in, and they're influenced by both of them. I don't know equally, but maybe. But one stream is the culture. They're in it all day long. Every time they pull on the TV or a radio or go to the internet, do their homework or whatever they're doing, they're in the culture. When they walk out the door of your house, well, really, they don't even have to do that. The culture is right in your house, in many places. And so they don't see all the bad in the culture. They see bad, but they don't lump that into this generic term, everything in the culture is bad in the culture. If you're all involved in fighting the culture, especially the anti-Catholic elements of it, you can sound like someone who hates America, like somebody who hates everything they walk in every day. And if you set yourself up that way as the anti-person, then your child either will step in line with you in order to defend their dad or their mom or their grandpa or whoever this is. But at the same time, they're going to be distancing themselves from the culture. And there will be things in the culture they like. So if the culture uses the internet badly, which some do, and you lump that into one whole, the internet is terrible, it's bad, it's evil, that's it. Your child immediately is in a conflict between what they know it can be good and often is used perfectly well and is so big a help to them. And now the person that they love and who they listen to is telling them it's all evil, it's all evil, it's all bad. Just one broad sweep. See, it sets up a conflict in them. And it's a false conflict. It should not have to be there. The good things in the culture are good, and they should stand as good. When I was in I think it was third grade, my little brother died of polio in the epidemic of the 1940s. And the neighbor kids, we had the people from the insurance companies were going door to door selling polio insurance. And many kids died, one after another, especially if they got it in their lungs. They were paralyzed and they couldn't breathe. And that's what happened to him. Now, my grandchildren, they ate a sugar cube and they'll never get polio because in that sugar cube is a miracle little drug and they'll never get it. Tell me that's not good. Tell me the grief of my mother with that little box of my brother's toys in her closet. They buried him in her casket. That was her instruction. She never got over his death. Never. She carried it to her grave. She didn't mourn about it. She wasn't remorse, she wasn't depressed about it or anything. But this was a loss no parent should have to have. And because of Jonas Salk and that vaccine and all the rest of it, my family will never have to suffer that for that reason again. That is good, and that's in the culture. So be very careful when you are dealing with the things in the culture that violate the teachings of our Catholic Church, that you use a rifle right on that subject, not a shotgun that blasts the whole culture. They will not understand that. They'll look at you And then if push comes to shove, what do they choose? They choose the culture. They'll get into college where religion is far away, is laughed at, is considered primitive and ignorant by teachers who should know better but say it anyway. And then your child feels like if they're going to Mass, they're superstitious. And those that don't go, what's the matter with you? Why do you do that? That's your parents' generation thing. Don't contribute to dividing your child between church and culture. The best thing is conversation. The best thing is to say, this is what the church says. Religion is reasonable. Catholic faith is reasonable. Everything in it can pass the test of reason. And so then you begin to show them. If you can't show them, find books that they can read. But don't condemn. The minute you condemn, you will stir in them a desire to defend what you're condemning. Does that work? Yes, that's exactly how it works. Especially in a child who wants to rebel from parents who they consider to be narrow. You only see this much. There's so much more of the world than what you're seeing. Now, when I was a kid growing up, you might have said that, but you had been considered a little strange. Because we all stayed home. We were raised in the same town, in the same house, sometimes the same house a couple of generations were raised in. We didn't see the whole world unless we got to travel. And most of us didn't have that kind of money. We saw the next town, or we went to the capital for a basketball game in the playoffs. But it was pretty limited. Those who were in war got to go to other places, but they came back often very damaged. And their experience wasn't a broadening experience of seeing the world. It was something very inhuman, because wars are that. To defend freedom is very costly for the human heart. So don't condemn the culture. Don't throw the baby out with the bathwater, they used to say. But use a rifle, aim right at that thing that is bad, and just say, this is wrong. There are so many subjects today, because of the wide distribution of information, that we learn about people everywhere. We learn that there are things in all cultures that are so common, so much a part of every culture. Anthropologists picked those things out long decades ago, but not all of them. They could say what was a constant in all cultures. And those constants really kind of define what is the human experience. And so I really urge you to think before you speak with your kids or in front of them. I remember when growing up, and I don't know if I mentioned this before, but my dad was a solid Republican, and my grandfather too, but his father, 3 generations back, very Democrats on the farm, and boy, you voted the Democratic ticket, they'll take care of the farmers. Republicans won't. That was the big argument that I heard in my house when I was a kid, like this. And so when I got into high school, we had a senator who was, we called him the big wind from the north, because he was an orator, and Hubert Humphrey, Democrat. And I read in school about many good things that he did. So I went home and I said to my dad, I read today that all these good things Hubert Humphrey did, and he was a Democrat. And my dad didn't know quite how to answer that, because he really very strong opinions. But he softened it and he said, well, he is good as long as you don't give him the checkbook. Well, that answered it for him. But it showed me that my dad could recognize good in somebody who wasn't part of the culture he approved of. And I was raised in a time when you spoke badly about other religions, other Christian religions. I was raised in a household of this denomination, and these spoke very badly about the others. Well, I had friends in the others. These were good kids. I knew them. They were my friends. Why was my church saying something bad about them? Children, listen. So what is good, approve. Even in your enemy, there has to be something you can affirm. And you don't try to find something to affirm. But if you're going to talk about this person in this way, that they would not be good for running the country, or they would not be good in this position, or he doesn't do his job the way the others do. And so we were never allowed growing up to criticize the police. We had to be respectful. Police and teachers, that was the big two. You respect them. And then my parents would talk about them. We'd hear that, if we were listening to them and talking in their bedroom, they'd have conversations they wouldn't have in front of us. But in front of us, always respectful. And that's teaching, that teaches. I think also we have to learn to insert our faith into the culture. This is what's called by many the post-Christian era. In a post-Christian era, that means the church no longer dictates how we live in the United States. There was a time when it really did, in so many respects, but not now. Now the church is the one who's holding everybody back, they say. Well, how do you deal with that? Well, not long ago we took a trip to Hawaii. And everywhere I went in Hawaii, I saw these CDs for Israel Kamakavivo Ole. I really worked hard to learn to pronounce his name. He weighed about 500 pounds, big Hawaiian with a beautiful voice. And he's dead. He died some years ago. But he was very involved in the movement to keep Hawaii Hawaiian. And yet at the same time, he had this wonderful way of recognizing it could not go backwards. And so his saying on one of his albums, he says, we can lament that so many losses of our Hawaiianness, but you can't stop progress. And he said, we have to learn to insert our Hawaiianness into the progress. John Paul tried that with the European Union when it was being formed. He kept telling them, please, in the Constitution of the European Union, put that Christianity united Europe from tribal opposites into a union. And he failed to do that. They weren't going to do it because there were too many other religions involved in the European Union. But he was trying to insert his Catholicness into the culture. And we can do that by many means. American bishops have set up to where there are many documents that tell us how to do that. That's very high on their agenda right now. If your kids understand that the culture is secular, that it's made up of people from all kinds of backgrounds, and it makes up laws that may be very fair, but may be contrary to what the church teaches, as long as they know the contradiction, and as long as you don't turn on the venom and condemn, then they can navigate that. They may make a choice you don't like. They may say, you know what, Dad? You know what, Mom? I know that the church teaches this, and I know that you believe it, but I believe this. Then the first thing you want to do is accept that. You say, I understand you do believe that. That's not saying I agree with you, but you've heard them. If you don't do that, you haven't heard them yet, and they will keep at you with that until you do hear them. And then they maybe want you to agree with them. Children, as they get older, learn to reason. And so they'll see this and this which contradict each other. And then if there is a contradiction, I have to make some kind of choice if it's important to me, which is true, or are both true in different ways. If you teach them to reason, they'll do that. And sometimes it's going to be embarrassing because they're going to believe something you don't. And how do you deal with that? You go to your knees. You go in prayer that night and you say, Lord, I taught my children what the church teaches. I haven't condemned the other side. I've simply said they don't believe that. We do. I haven't given them reason to run to their defense. And so now you work in the heart of my child with your grace that they can understand this as we do. At that point, because they're of their age, that's what you can do. And I don't say that's the only thing you can do, because I would say it's the most important thing you can do. God listens to parents. You might not get an answer for 20 years. They might keep believing that for 20 years, and it tears your heart out to see it. But you need to love that child, and eventually, in time, God will provide them with reasons to believe it. Might be a long time. I think it's hard. We think of our children as almost like a possession. My child. I conceived the child, we gave birth to this child, this is mine. But you know what? Really not. This is God's child. They're in many respects just on loan to us. And we have to do the very best we can. But He takes responsibility. God does. And what you can't do, He will do. If not now, later. If not later, much later. But you can depend on Him to bring your child around to what is essential for them to understand. And maybe all these things that they see as contradictions that you never get them to understand, and they never will accept it. But what they will accept is the essential core ones that God considers important. I think we don't give Him enough credit in the raising of our kids. You can't just leave all of it to Him. But I'll tell you, if you trust Him that He will help them, He will. He's a God who always acts when He sees faith. I would like to close this conversation with you in this session by quoting a great philosopher. She was a Jewish girl. She was brilliant. Her parents were practicing their faith, but she felt no need for God. And she said so. She said, I have everything. I have a fine mind. I can understand everything. I have my family. I'm happy. I don't recognize any interior need for God. And she was in her early teens when she said that. And then she studied philosophy. She studied phenomenology. She studied from the originator of phenomenology and from his disciple, his major disciple. So she was teaching philosophy, phenomenology, in the university. And John Paul II, he was a phenomenologist. And she ran into Teresa of Avila. And she read Teresa's autobiography. And after she read it, she was so taken with it that she became a Catholic. And then, some years later, I think 8 or 9 years later, she became a Carmelite nun. Really went full force toward God. And converted through the reading of that book. Well, she wrote something that I think is the litmus test for really any Catholic to keep, just like tattoo it on your brain. She said, truth without love is not truth. You tell your child or your spouse or your friend or your neighbor the truth with no love, and you've distorted it. Paul said, speak the truth with love. Here's the truth, but the love is missing. The truth is, this fetus that you are carrying is Down syndrome, according to the amniocentesis, blah, 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 that we've done. And so this is going to be a hard child to raise and everything, and the doctor is recommending that you abort it. Well, everything I just said, apart from the last statement, was true. But there's no love in it. This is a child of God. This is a treasure. This is a cosmic event, the conception of this little one. This is an eternal being. This is an eternal being. So you can have truth, but without love is twisted, distorted. Things you tell people without love, without telling them in love, somehow make the truth something other than the truth. And then she reversed it. She said, love without truth is not love. You can say to a child, to a young woman, for example, you can say, well, you're pregnant and you're not married and you haven't finished your education, you need to abort this child. It's going to drag you down. This child, you're not going to be able to go to school. You're going to have to start taking care of it. You have to quit school and go to work. Okay, you're trying to tell them out of love to save and spare them. But it's not love at all. It's love without truth. The truth is, again, this is an eternal being you're carrying. This is the image of God. This one is going to challenge you to love it and to raise it right and to give it a whole beautiful life. Truth without love is not truth. And love without truth is not love. And she was right. She was taken to Auschwitz, and she was incinerated in the furnaces there with many, many others because of her faith in Christ, targeted as a religious. But she died a great philosopher as well. And so I just leave that with you. God bless you. In my work as a priest, I've been in parishes where there were predominantly young families with lots of children. And I'm in a parish now that is older. Most, I think the largest number of people are older people because of the area. And it doesn't matter where you are, every single one of the parents that I've encountered, old or young, they want the best for their children. I think that this is like a universal. They don't want to do it wrong. They don't want to give their child some kind of heartache that they're going to have to spend years getting over with. The truth is we don't always know how. I think some parents, that the lament that I hear the most is from the older people. And they tell me I was too strict, or I demanded too much. I didn't give enough love. I didn't put enough love in it. Isn't that interesting? I wonder if other priests have the same experience. They look and their children aren't going to Mass. Their kids are raised and having kids of their own. They're not going to Mass, many of them. And they feel they failed something. And they don't understand that kids sometimes will do that they'll walk away. They won't go to Mass. And then at some point in their life, they want to, and they come back. And we have to leave lots of room for mistakes, lots of room for God. It doesn't all work according to the book. But I think this series, the reason we did it, was to give people who are going to be parents, especially those preparing for marriage, those preparing to have their first baby or even the second or third, those who are wanting better tools. We just really want to give you some things to think about. It isn't a manual on how to raise your kids. And it certainly isn't a doctrinal manual on how to teach kids the Catholic faith. That's someone else's job. This is reflecting on how you bring your children into that arena where the Holy Spirit wants to produce fruit. And these 9 fruit of the Spirit that we've been pointing to, that's the fruit He wants to produce in the soul of your child. So God bless you. I hope and wish every good gift for you as a parent.